listening skills by our first mentor, Dr. Revati Srinivas, we ascend to another equally important language skill, reading skill, which is the fundamental to understanding a language. It is the process of decoding written symbols for the process and purpose of making meaning or getting information. As the third skill in language acquisition, it requires great deal of concentration on the material to be read, taking appropriate notes on the words, their pronunciations, and also the punctuation marks that guides the reading for meaningful comprehension. We now move into the session on reading skills with our next esteemed mentor, Professor Emmy Veda Sharan. I seek with the permission of the chair, I request our mentor to take over the session. Over to you, sir.
Okay, good morning to you all. I am very grateful to you for having invited me to this amazing session. And it's such a delight to see young people interested in learning things and getting on in life. So we'll begin right away. So I can't share the screen, but I have sent in a PPT. If you could put it up on the screen, I'd be
Yes,
grateful for
sir.
that.
Absolutely. Sharing your PPT here, sir.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Okay, reading while the PPT comes up. Uh, Many people say that reading is a passive skill, that it is, you know, you could sit back and relax, and that contrasts with the other two skills which require a lot of activity from you, the speaking and the writing part. But reading and listening are not passive skills. They demand a lot of attention from us, and of course, they bring in a lot of our own personality into the show. So uh, I welcome you to this session here. I said cordially welcome you. Now you would have seen this in invitation cards, especially marriage invitation cards, where they say that you're cordially welcome. And if you look at the word cordial, it is connected to the word cardiac. The root word is core, which means a heart. Cor, C-O-R, cor, Latin for heart, and cordial is from the heart. Okay, so I welcome you from my heart. At least that's what the wedding cards say. But this is our session to learn reading, a little more practical than that. Ma'am, can we get on to the next slide, please? Many people say that English has now become the lingua franca of the world. Ma'am, can we move on to the next slide? By lingua franca, we mean the link language, the language that connects people. Ma'am, can we move on to the next slide? Hello?
Yes, sir. Is this the slide you want?
No, the next slide, please.
So would please prompt me for which slide you want. This one?
The second one, the second one. The
Okay.
one after this.
Is it the slide number 2? This one?
Yeah, this is the one. Yes.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, the word lingua franca has a slightly bad meaning, in the sense that it is the language of a dominant imperialistic power, like the British were in our country. It contrasts with the word vernacular languages, as we say. The word varna is a Sanskrit word which means color, and vernacular had indirectly the meaning of a slave language, the language spoken by slaves, in contrast with the language spoken by the ruling classes, the British in our case. Now, wherever we go, we have English as the link language. A pilot landing, um, our pilot landing a plane in, let us say, Norway or Sweden will not speak in Hindi, but will speak in English, the ATC. So, what is this language doing for us? Is a question that I would like you to ask. Is it connecting the world for us, or is it dividing the world? In India, we now have a caste of English-speaking people who think that they are superior to people who don't speak English, and that's a very stupid thing to feel. We'll come back to these issues if we have the time. Ma'am, can we move on to the next slide? I'd just like to spend a little time on what this language is and a little bit of the background. The people who now live in England, in Great Britain as it is called, in other words, were a tribal people who migrated to this island from Germany. So they have a Germanic origin, and they had, next slide, ma'am. Yeah, the names of the tribes were the Angles, the Saxons, the Celts, or the Celts as you want, and the Jutes. The Angles and the Saxons were the people who were in the majority, and therefore English is sometimes called Anglo-Saxon. The word Angles seems to be the one which has given its name to the island called England. It is the genitive or the possessive form. England is the genitive or the possessive form of Angles. So England literally means the land of the Angles. The word Angles itself has a meaning. It means a fishing hook, a hook by which we catch fish. And maybe there were fishing people who went fishing. And why the names of the Celts and the Jutes are not there as a part of the name of the island, we don't know. It happened too much in the past, so we don't really know. But these are the four major tribes that migrated into England and settled down there to become the modern British people. But of course, there were other people who were already living there before these tribes moved in from Germany. Next slide, ma'am. Ma'am, can we have the next slide?
So is this one the next slide you want?
The one after this.
Okay, Scandinavian invasions.
A little before that. Yeah, the Romans invaded the British Isles under Julius Caesar. The one after this, man. Under Julius Caesar, the British Isles were invaded by the Romans, and that's why we have a lot of Latin words in the English language, because it was colonized by the Roman people. Words like via, for example, inter, which is connected to our own Sanskrit word antar. These are some of the Latin origin words, and Latin words are there in the English language because they were ruled by the Latin speaking people. Next slide, ma'am. We don't have much time to spend on these things, but I just want to give you a background to this language. Ma'am, next slide, please.
This one, sir, the German tribes arrive.
It has not changed here for me.
It's changed here, sir, actually.
Okay. Yeah, in the the Common Era, as it is called, or the Christian era, 449. The Germanic tribes arrived there. The Angles, the Jutes, and the Celts. And yes, ma'am, the next slide. The Scandinavians are the people who live in Northern Europe, in countries like Sweden, Denmark, Finland. They invaded the British Isles, and we have a lot of Scandinavian words in English, like bank, for example, which is a Scandinavian word. Right, next slide, ma'am. In the year 1066 AD, or the Common Era, the French invaded England in what is called the Norman Conquest. Ma'am, could you change the slide?
I've changed it to the English Renaissance.
No, ma'am, the Scandinavian invasions is still here with me. The next one is
the
Norman Conquest. The Normans were French people, and they conquered England and settled down in the islands. They intermarried with the local people, and they became a part of the population. And that is why we have so many French words in the English language, like rendezvous, debt, and hundreds and thousands of other words. Ma'am, next slide, please. Yeah, then English greatly increased in vocabulary and size thanks to the English Renaissance of the 16th century, where we had tremendous great writers like Shakespeare and all of them writing. In 1612, the Bible was translated into English, and the Bible is a great source of new words and an amazing increase in vocabulary in the history of the English language. Ma'am, next slide, please. The English language increased in size because of their huge, vast colonial empire, which covered almost half the world. So they borrowed words from all the people that they met and increased the English language in size, in vocabulary. Ma'am, next slide, ma'am. The Colonial Empire.
Is it visible, sir?
No, ma'am, it's not visible.
I'll ask one of my colleagues to share it, sir.
That's the one.
Yeah. Dr. Shirupa Roy, may I please request you to share it at your end? Or Dr. Prachi?
Yes, sure, I'll be sharing. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Can we go to the next
if you can enable my screen sharing.
Sure,
Dr. Sukanya, if you could please enable my screen sharing.
Yes, I have.
Thank you. Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you go to the next slide, please?
So is it the slide you would like to be presented now?
Yeah, the next slide, the slide after this. Right, they had a very proud boast that the British Empire was an empire over which the sun never set. And you can see that the reason was that they had colonies both in the east and the west. And that is how they could have this vast empire. Next slide, ma'am. So if you ask the question, why doesn't the sun set of the British Empire? It's because they had colonies both in the east and west. And another explanation is that God does not trust the British in the dark, and that's why he had them always under the sun. Okay, the next one, ma'am. Next slide, please. Yeah, the main languages from which English has borrowed its words are Latin, French, German, Sanskrit, Greek, and so on. Next slide, ma'am. There are basically 250 languages, but these are some of the important ones. Russian, Italian, Spanish, Arabic. Next slide, ma'am. So I would like you all to ask this question: why do we need English? Is there something that English does which other languages cannot do? And I'm sure that you will have your own individual answers, so we will not spend too much time on this. Ma'am, next slide, ma'am. Yeah, there are new words that are coming in now, mostly from anthropology, psychology, and yeah, it's a global language, all right, but how many of us are going to be global travelers? And what is the percentage of Indians who speak English? And who are the people who speak English anyway? So these are questions I'd like you to ask for yourselves. What is the percentage of Indians who speak English now? I don't know, if you exaggerate, maybe it's about 15% or 20%. And yeah, so is it a global language? Is it our lingua franca? 13% or something like that. So you need to think about it. We learn our mother tongues, and then we are spending literally thousands of hours from our lives learning this language, which is not ours. Yeah, it's not becoming. I think we are making it. We are making it a medium. We are choosing to make it. These are controversial things, but I want you to answer these things for yourselves. The Japanese learned car technology from the West in Japanese. They purchased the manuals to make cars and translated them into Japanese, and now they are beating the Americans in car technology, the Germans, and so on. So, do we need English? As I said, this is your own personal answer that you will give. So, I will not impose my answers on you. So, you take a call on that. So, the new areas from which um, English is getting words is anthropology, psychology, information technology. Now, for example, from anthropology, there's this word called farbot, father's brother, which they are trying to popularize, but it doesn't gain too much from it. But we have a word like cognate and agnate. Cognates are people who are related to you from your mother's side, and agnates are people related to you from your father's side. These are anthropological words. Of course, from psychology, we have a huge area that we call psychobabble, where common people use psychological terms without actually understanding what they are, what they mean, like introvert, extrovert, obsessive compulsive neurosis, or disorder, or whatever it is, things like that. And the information technology, I don't need to give you examples for that. So it's a huge, fast-growing language. It's the fastest growing language in the world, gaining about 7,000 to 15,000 words every year, depending upon who you listen to. So it's an amazing language. Next slide, ma'am. Yeah, some of these words you would have heard of very well. Dinks refers to a newly married couple who are both working. So it reads as double income, no kids, very well. YOLO is you only live once. BFF is best friends forever. Kidvid is video for kids, and Couch Potato, somebody who's always watching television. These are words that are coming in, new words, relatively new words. Next slide, ma'am. Now this word has come in. Dis is to diss someone, is to disrespect someone. So you can say she, this is my colleagues. Disinvite is when you invite somebody and to a party, to your birthday, and then you have a fight with them and you tell them not to come. This is to disinvite people. So these are words that are coming into the language now. Next slide. Right, let's get down to the reading part now. The word English comes from Redan, which is of German origin, and so on. And the early senses of the word include advise, interpret, a riddle or a dream. And originally, English, the word read had, Redan, read, had this meaning. Next one. Yeah, it also has a Sanskrit origin, Radhnoti, which means he achieves. So you can see how rich language is when it suggests certain ideas that are so reflective of life, which show how life is lived actually. So since reading is a skill, it's an achievement in Sanskrit. Radhnoti is the Sanskrit word from which we get the word read. It means he achieves. Next slide, ma'am. Sorry. There are different kinds of reading. You could have a whole range of them depending on the intensity of reading. Just as we have different kinds of listening. We have you hear, you overhear, then you kind of eavesdrop, different kinds of listening. And so we have different kinds of reading. So browse is the word that comes from animals. Cows and buffaloes we call browsers because they eat only the top part of the grass and they don't go down to the roots. So browsing is when you look at a text in a very casual, or if you want it, superficial kind of way. We say we browse the internet, where we look at the home screen, but we don't go deep into it. And the other end of the spectrum is this focused, concentrated use kind of reading, which is perusal, which is a very official sounding word. So from browsing you do when you go into a bookshop and you turn the pages quickly with your thumb to see the names of the chapters, pictures, or whatever. So that's very fast. And at the other end of the scale, we have peruse, which is actually a contronym. A contronym is a word that has two opposite meanings. I think like the Hindi word kal, which means both yesterday and tomorrow. So peruse can mean read casually, and it also can mean read with a lot of focus and concentration. It has both these meanings at the same time, depending on the context. Like in Hindi, we can say kal is yesterday or kal is tomorrow. This is a contronym. Next slide, ma'am. Ma'am, can we move on to the next slide, please? Yeah, so these are some of the things that I just casually put down, the different kinds of reading that we have. Browsing, you glance through, you skim, scan, read, study, peruse, pore. Pore is when you read for many hours together with a tremendous amount of focus and concentration. And you don't move out from your seat for maybe 10 or 12 hours. And that is pouring. So browsing is very casual, it goes very fast. You glance through maybe to revise something. Skimming, as you know, is uh, reading the passage for an outline to just understand its broad outlines. You skim by reading the first two lines and the last two lines of a paragraph. In good pieces of writing, the first two lines are the topic sentence of the paragraph, and the last two lines are the conclusion of the discussion in the paragraph. And this is skimming. You skim when the passage is not very important for you. Scanning, as you know, is looking for specific information. In English, we know that the name of a person or a place normally begins with a capital letter. So if you want to find somebody's name or place, you look for a capital letter in the text, and this is scanning, as you know. Broadly, what we call read is a lot of activity that we do. You read a newspaper, you read a novel. But if you want to distinguish it from more focused reading, we can have study, peruse, and pore. These last three require a tremendous amount of patience, and they require a lot of effort and time. Ma'am, next slide, please, ma'am. Next slide, ma'am. Yeah. So we need to have what are called strategies, reading strategies. Strategy is a military term. It's a word from the armed forces. The strategos was a general who planned the war. So here the idea is that you have a certain amount of time and um, a certain amount of text or material to read. So you have to plan it out how to read. And that's why we talk about reading strategies. Next slide, ma'am. Can you, yeah. So we often talk about what is called reading comprehension. Comprehension is, as you know, to understand. Ma'am, next slide, please. Yeah, let's break up this word comprehension. Com means together. You can find it in words such as community, combine, come, comfort, comply, compose. Com means together, and prehendere means to grasp or to hold. If you have traveled by any public transport, you will know that grasping and holding is a very crucial part of survival. So, how strongly do you grasp or hold what you have read is the important part of comprehension. So, when you say together, it means that there are at least two people involved in the act of reading. You as the reader, and then the writer is the other party. Between you, you create meaning. Without you, without the reader, without you, we only have ink marks on a page. There is no writing at all. It is the reader who gives meaning to what is there on the text. And so we can say it's a partnership that we have with the writer in creating meaning. So what you have is a very, very important responsibility, that you are giving meaning to the work of a great writer. So that's a sacred, almost a holy thing. Yeah, next slide, ma'am. Yeah, according to many people, reading is probably the most important source of our knowledge. Some people say we get about 80% of what we know through reading, but listening also plays a very important role. Next slide, ma'am. So we need to ask this question: what does a good reader do? What makes a good reader? Well, this is a very interesting and a slightly difficult question to ask. Good readers or competent readers read fast. They read with understanding. These are the two main things that a good reader does. A good reader is someone who can read about 200 to 250 words a minute. That's a good reader. And a good reader will understand something like 80% of a text. It's not necessary for us to understand every single word in the text, as Dr. Revati was saying in the morning, it's not necessary for you to understand every single word that is spoken, but you can understand it broadly. Um, your next one, please. Yeah, a good reader focuses on the meaning of the words and not on the words themselves. I think I'll clarify this with an example. Ma'am, next slide, ma'am. So if you remember uh, South Pole as Antarctica, if the writer has it in South Pole, but you remember it as Antarctica, then it is the same thing. You're focusing on the meaning and not on the uh, not on the exact words written by the writer. To give you another common example, try and remember a message that your friend gave you sometime last week. Did this friend speak to you in Hindi or English, or was it a mix of both? Probably you won't remember the exact words that your friend used, but you will remember the message. And that was a very competent piece of listening because you focused on the meaning and not on the words. And when we read also, we do a similar thing, that we focus on the meaning of the words and not on the words. Okay. We'll come back to these points a little later in our subsequent talks. Ma'am, next poll, next one, please. Yeah, good readers do not read individual words. They read in groups of words. English, as you know, is what is called an analytic language, in the sense that um, the words do not combine and they have a regular place. If you look at the structure of the English language, it has the subject, verb, object pattern in the sentence. The subject normally comes at the beginning, is positioned at the beginning. It is followed by the verb, and then it is followed by an object. And then, of course, there are other variants that you can have. But this is the normal structure of the English sentence: subject, verb, object. Um, so what we do now here is um, to remember that 80% of the meaning of a sentence, about 80% of the meaning of a sentence, is concentrated in the nouns and the verbs. And we read these nouns and verbs with more focus than we read adjectives. I'm not saying that the adjectives are not so important, but the most of the meaning is focused in the nouns and the verbs. And we need to train ourselves to focus more on these things. These are ideas I'll come back to a little later. But this is, I'm just going through a broad uh, structure of what we will be looking at later. So next slide, ma'am. So for example, you can take the format of a newspaper which prints in columns. A column, as you know, is a pillar. And the way in which a newspaper prints is called a column. Why do they print it in columns? And why don't they print the sentence from one end of the paper to the other end, from left to right? Now, this is because they know that we are in a hurry in the morning to go to office or to class, and they want to help us to read as much news as possible. So what happens here is that our eye jumps from one line to the next line, and we are reading in groups of words. Of course, yeah, visuals also matter, and uh, yeah, if you look at Alice in Wonderland, she has this interesting line where she looks at her older sister's book and says, "Of what use is a book if it does not have pictures and conversation in it?" But sometimes we do want uh, these illustrations, but not always, I think, especially when we want books as cheap as possible. and illustrations are only going to increase the price of it. So in the newspaper, we have these columns that um, enable us to read faster. And we should transfer this habit of this technique of reading the newspaper um, to the text that we are reading. And next one, ma'am, can we? I'll come back to these points as we go along later. A good reader will use the context to guess what words and ideas will follow. Now, this is to anticipate. This is anticipation. Now, just now in the earlier listening class, we were looking at a formal situation and an informal situation, and we use language which suits the occasion, and that's how we anticipate it. For example, when you're talking at home, your brother will be eager to say something, and so you want to draw the attention of the other people by saying he's eager to say something, or he's dying to say something. Now, this is a formal way of putting it. But if you are among friends and one of your friends wants to say something, you would say something like, he has ants in his pants, which is one way of saying that, he really wants to say something very desperately or badly. So, uh, going by the context, we can anticipate what kind of language we will be using. Is it formal or informal? And we are prepared for that. And also based on the text, on the kind of subject that we are reading. In economics, we are prepared for terms like banks, depression, inflation, boom, industry. These are words that we expect to find in an economics text. In a political science text, in politics, we find words like government, constitution, and a whole lot of other stuff. So if we are ready for these things, then we will read faster. And faster reading would mean less frustration, less time, less energy, and more rewards. And that will encourage us to read further. We'll elaborate on these things as we go along. Ma'am, next one. Can we get over to the next slide? We may find some new words in a text, and we don't have time to go to the dictionary all the time. So what we do is to use our experience, our observation to understand the words, which we do not know. So it means that when we are reading something, when we are listening to something, then we need to bring our experience to the classroom or to the reading text so that we can understand things better. Let me give you an example. Uh, Next one, ma'am. If you can look at this slide here, the word is excursion. Now, excursion is something which is very pleasurable for us, but here it is not so pleasurable. It is because the plane has crashed. It's a technical term here. When a plane is landing, it's supposed to be about 250 kilometers per hour, this travel speed. If it is more than that, then it's going to overshoot the runway and crash. So the word excursion is used in a different technical sense here of an aeroplane overshooting the runway. So by using this context, we understand the meaning of a word. Next slide, ma'am. So if you look at this word excursion, it is the opposite of incursion. Incursion is forcible entry in an unauthorized way. So we have incursion of terrorists across the border, where they enter without authority in an illegal way. So excursion is going out without authorization or without permission. So what I'm trying to say here is that as we read something, we use various strategies to decode the meaning. We look at the meaning, we look at the opposites, we look at a whole lot of other things as we go along. And this is what we need to do as I'll discuss these things later in the, ma'am, next, can we go to the next slide? Okay, take a look at these two words here. I'm sure you know these words, but even if you don't know, you can guess these words. The meaning of this word, strum and plectrum. Uh, Anybody knows the meaning can please type it out? Or what strum and plectrum mean? Okay, now you can go to the next slide, ma'am. Right, so now you can guess the meaning of the word without actually looking up the dictionary. Yes, exactly. You run your fingers on the strings of the guitar, or you use the plectrum, which you know is a plastic or a glass kind of thing to vibrate the chords of a guitar. So you could guess the meaning without even referring to the dictionary, because you observe how a dictionary, how a guitar is being played. So this is a technique that yes, this is to move your fingers up and down the strings. Yes, you're right. So this is to strum a guitar with a plectrum. So as you can see, we already have the concept in the mind. We just have to attach a word to it. And so it's going to be pretty easy when you do that. It's just that the word has to be added. Next slide, ma'am. Yeah, a good reader reads different materials at different speeds. And this is a very important thing that you must do. You must never read everything at the same speed. You have gossip columns about why an actor committed suicide or was killed off, or things like that, which are of no direct relevance for us. But when we read for an interview or when we read for an examination, then we read more carefully. We spend more time on it. Once again, we'll get back to these things a little later. Ma'am, uh, next slide, please. Right. Good readers are familiar with the technical words in the field in which they are reading. If you're reading botany, if you're reading commerce, you need to be familiar with the technical words in this area. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of problems because you'll have to stop and then look at the technical terms. So uh, we can say that a good reader will make a better reader. So it's a skill that we develop over a long time. It's not something that's going to happen very fast, but we need to go about it in a scientific kind of way, and that's why we need to look at some techniques of reading. So, um, so learning the technical language of a word of a field is a very important part of it, because almost every area has its own jargon, terminology, whatever you care to call that. Yeah, next one, ma'am. Right, some examples of technical language here, which are different from the normal usage of words or the more common usage of words. Like a word like save has a different meaning in a bank. Save is different when you pull a child out of a lake. You save lives. But saving something on a computer, as you know, is to put something permanently on the hard disk or one of the peripherals out there. So that is to save. Interface is the way in which two things uh, work together in computers, hardware and RAM. So these are the technical language technical terms, some of the technical terms that computers use this, and that is, it's important for us to know these words there. Can we get on the next slide, ma'am? Yeah. Good readers have a wide range of reading. They read a whole lot of subjects like science. They go to the humanities. They read novels and things like that. We will look at the other skills of learning, which are called intensive reading and extensive reading. We discussed two a little while ago, skimming and scanning. But intensive reading is reading with focus. It is what you would do for an examination, when you want to prepare for an exam, for an interview, for a job. You will read with a lot of focus. Extensive reading is reading for pleasure, reading for fun, for enjoyment. Any guess which of these two is a greater source of information and knowledge? Intensive reading or extensive reading? Would anybody like to make a guess? Intensive? Why would you say intensive? Intensive reading is mostly confined to your syllabus. And your syllabus is a very small part of what you will read. So extensive reading has a wider range. When you read stories, when you read poetry, when you read novels, when you read the newspaper, this is the extensive. Yeah, this is done for pleasure. It does not mean that you cannot enjoy reading for the exam. I think you should enjoy that as well. Right, absolutely. So the single largest source of knowledge in in reading is extensive reading. That's what gives us more information. It's simply because it's a much huge, vaster area with more variety than what we have. Yes, because we are interested in it, we are more attentive. It's what we choose to read. It's our choice. I think when we are asked to read or forced to read something, the mind rebels against it. Maybe you can enjoy a novel on a train, but if the same novel is prescribed as a part of the syllabus, you'd hate it. I think that's a very human tendency. But I think, as we grow older and more mature, we should give everything a chance. And yes, absolutely. Interest is a very, very important thing. It is probably the single most important factor in doing anything. Sometimes I see these young people playing cricket in 45-degree heat, and they do that because they love the game. They don't care for the heat of the sun. But the same people will not be able to read for half an hour in the comfort of their homes when their parents are getting them snacks and coffee. Nothing matters. But because of their interest and love for the game, they can do just about anything, and 45-degree heat is nothing for them. Absolutely agree with you that interest and the love for something is a very, very important thing. And if you look at the Mahabharata, we have the story where the hero is, yeah, where the hero is having his meal and the light goes off. And he thinks that if he can find his mouth without a light, why can't he shoot without seeing a target? And that's how he is obsessed with his art. That even when he's eating, he thinks about his art, and that's what makes him a great shooter. So it's our dedication to something that makes us, you know, successful in a certain area. Okay. Um, can we get on to the next slide, ma'am? Oh, yes, I think you're right. Thank you for correcting me. Yeah, uses different aids and tools such as dictionaries and thesauruses. Now, I don't know how many of you have used a dictionary in your mother tongue. Can you just say yes? How many of you have actually picked up a dictionary in your mother tongue to look up a word? But English is not our mother tongue, it is what we call our other tongue. So we have to use a dictionary in that. I hope to spend one class on how to use a dictionary, which is an amazing thing, especially in English. We'll come back to this a little later. A thesaurus, as you know, is anybody knows what a thesaurus is? What does a thesaurus do? A thesaurus gives you a list of synonyms and antonyms. Yeah, it gives you a list of both synonyms and antonyms. And the thesaurus is a Latin word which actually means a treasure. So what treasure is this? It's a treasure of course, words. And then we have, you can have word cards. People have word cards. They write down words on a card. The word on one side and the meaning on the other side. So you look at the word and guess the meaning and check it out by turning the card, or you look at the meaning and then guess the word. So there are many other devices which we will come back to help you increase your vocabulary. Can we go on to the next slide? Right. Good readers, competent readers, feel happy when they learn new words. It should be a triumph for you to learn new words. You should celebrate that, like you have found some money on the road or you have earned money for yourself. So you should do this. And when you learn these new words, you need to clarify for yourself what exactly these words are. What do they mean? For example, what is the difference between happiness and joy? How is joy different from happiness? Anybody can explain that? There are two words. Yes, please. What is your question? Uh, Happiness is what you find at the end of the stories. They lived happily ever after, not joyfully, cheerfully, gladly, but happily ever after. So, happily seems to be for a lifetime. And joy is something very intense but lasts for a shorter time. Maybe joy is when you find a 2000 rupee note on the road. And happiness is when you achieve a certificate, something, a degree in life, and you feel happy whenever you look at it. Yes, please ask your question. Okay, joy is, it's certainly more intense. It's certainly more intense. Similarly, could you consider anger and rage? Which is more intense and um, which lasts for a longer time? Right. So we need to clarify for ourselves how these words differ as we go along to make us more complete readers and understand these things in a more in a better way. Could you repeat that, please, while reading? What was that? I can't see this. I'm using a phone, and happiness is an emotion which is.
Sir, may I
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, may I intervene? I am Dr. Dipjani Roy.
Yes.
There are a few suggestions from the YouTube chat box.
Okay.
Tusharita Sinha says joy is fun and happiness is pleasure.
Okay.
Joy is fun, happiness is pleasure. And Sanjana Prakash says rage is more intense, but it lasts shorter. And
Yes.
Pratishtha Singh says anger lasts longer than rage.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes. And what you need to do is to connect every word, every experience to your personal life. Whatever you're reading should be understood in the context of your personal life. That is, it should be a part of your experience. And unless you do that, you cannot really understand what you're reading. So it has to be whatever you're reading or whatever you're listening to has to be connected to your personal life. And that's a very, very, very important thing to do. So when do you feel rage and when do you feel anger? Maybe rage is when somebody stamps on your toe in the bus. In a very crowded bus, somebody stamps on your toe and you get very angry because this person was so careless. Maybe anger or indignation is when someone does you injustice, like they borrow your notes and give it to you after the examination is over. So you feel very, very deprived of something yes. I think joy is stronger. Yes, I agree with you on that point. But maybe joy is more common than happiness because happiness is something that you would feel for a lifetime. Yes, yes. So you can just think about it and see how it goes on. We'll come back to these things. It's good that it doesn't matter if you make a few, if you're confused a bit. Right, ma'am, next slide, can we go on to? Okay, so a good reader will use what are called metacognitive skills. Metacognitive skills are, cognition is about understanding and metacognition is understanding about understanding. When you look at yourself and ask questions like why you could understand something or why you could not understand something, these are both equally important questions. Why did you forget something and why could you remember something? So you need to look at the positive aspects and try to strengthen them and look at the weak points and try to avoid those things. So you need to assess yourself. As you know, every person has an individual style of learning and reading. No two people will have the same style of reading it, and they will differ so much from in their own lifetime. Uh, you will not be the same kind of reader as you are when you are a young person, as you are now, and your style of reading will change as you grow older. Right. So you need to be assessing yourself all the time. Could you repeat that? I can't see the whole text here. Does metacognitive? Ma'am, could you read that out to me?
Questions means that it says that does metacognitive questions means philosophical questions?
No, they are not they are not philosophical questions at all. They are questions concerning your understanding. You look at yourself and see how you could understand a word and how you could remember a word. What did you do to understand a word and remember a word? And when you forgot a word, what happened? Why did you forget this word? What did you not do, or what did you do in remembering or forgetting a word? These are not philosophical questions. They are questions about you. You need to examine yourself and ask yourself questions as to why something has happened. I mean, the understanding or not understanding, the remembering or the forgetting. Why have these things happened? What did you do? And then you need to avoid those uh, actions like, let us say, casual reading or carelessness or whatever it is that makes you forget a word. But as I was saying, to understand anything better, you have to connect it to your life. You have to feel what you're reading. You have to become a part of that. You have to become involved in what you're doing, what you're reading. You have to visualize these things, or you have to uh, connect them to your experience in life that you live, and that is when you will really understand things. So metacognitive aspects are not philosophical things; they are personal things, very, very personal things.
Sir, would you
It's
like to
all
take up?
about you. It's all about you, actually. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, would you like to take up some more questions, sir, for today? Or would
Can
you
we
like
just
to
finish the
wind up?
slides? And I think there are 3 or 4 more slides, and then once we do that, we can get along with these things.
Okay, sure, sir. Sure, sir.
Yeah, the next one is, of course, motivation. Ma'am, can we move to the next slide? Okay, you need to motivate yourself. You need to take interest in things. You need to ask questions and be interested in what you're reading and how it happens. Okay, you can read whatever interests you. It could be philosophy, it could be film fare, whatever it might be. You need to read with interest and fascination. Ma'am, next slide. Yeah, this is a technical term that I'm using here. Epistemic factors. Um, Epistemology is concerned with knowledge. It basically asks questions like, how do we get knowledge? What are the limitations of knowledge? What are the frontiers of knowledge? So we ask a question like, is what I'm going to read useful for me? So what affairs actors have is not our concern, and it's not a part of our knowledge. And we're not going to spend too much time on reading these things. But what concerns us, what interests us, is a part of our knowledge. And these are the epistemic factors that you should be able to know what is knowledge for you. You should be able to distinguish between knowledge, information, data on one side, and on the other side, you have wisdom, and so on. So, which is superior? What is inferior to knowledge? What is superior to knowledge? And then you need to go on to achieve these things through reading. One of the sources is through reading. Ma'am, to the next slide, please. The next slide. Yeah. Um, a good reader has self-respect. As a person who respects yourself, you should not be upset when you don't understand something. You don't understand something because some information is missing in the middle. The chain is broken, but it's not because you're not intelligent. If you pay sufficient attention to what you're reading, if you fill in the gaps, you will understand what you're reading. So you should have this self-confidence that you can understand anything that you read, so long as you pay attention to it and put in the effort. But it is not a question of lacking information. Okay. We'll, if we have the time, come back to it. Next one, ma'am. Right. So, yeah. So reading should be a pleasure that you can relax when you're alone with yourself, and you should enjoy what you're doing. I think I'm finished for today. If you have any questions, I'll be most happy. Thank you so much.
So,
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this sailing us through these
yes.
elaborate history and
Yes,
skimming it with
Sukanya.
dexterity.
Thank you,
I
Sukanya.
have a question. I have a question. Can I put it, sir?
Yes.
It is from Harshita Kumari. She says, why did the British forsake their own language and begin to speak Anglo-Saxon?
Okay, I think there is some confusion. Anglo-Saxon is synonymous with English. Anglo-Saxon is actually simple English. And when somebody is speaking very complicated English that people don't understand, you can say Anglo-Saxon, please, meaning that you should speak simple English. English, as you know, has borrowed words from a lot of languages. And as I was saying, it's the fastest growing language in the world. It has this huge, vast vocabulary, which I'll try and show you sometime later. Now, the English have not forsaken English. They do speak English. But the interesting point here, since you asked this question, 95% of the words in the English language are borrowed from other languages. Only 5% is the original core. But the interesting point here is that 80% of the words that we use in everyday life are from this 5%. Like the important things that we do, like reading or sleeping, walking, eating, body parts like head, hand, these come from the original 5%. No, it is not that the English have left English. Anglo-Saxon is a synonym for English. It actually means simple English.
Oh, Doctor, thank you, Professor. This is Dr. Janet Andrew from the English department itself. We have a question from Shivangi Arya. She said,
Yes.
what should we focus on when we are reading? Should we focus on grammar or should we focus on the vocabulary? Which is more important when reading a passage?
See, grammar and vocabulary support each other. But as I was saying, your main focus is on the meaning of the passage. It is not so much the words that you focus upon as you should focus on the meaning. See, the example that I gave you, I think that's the best example I can give, is when somebody is giving you information and you remember that later. As I was saying, you don't remember if some words were in English or some words were in Hindi or it was a mix, but you remember the information that was given to you, and that's how you read. Your focus when you listen to it was not on the words, but it was on the meaning, and that is how you should read. The focus is on the meaning, not on the vocabulary itself. Of course, vocabulary is important.
Yes, Dr. Professor. And there's a linked question to that from Antara, Rolf 508. She says, how is reading a novel, an interesting novel, different from reading an interesting lesson for class, whichever language, Hindi or English or whatever? How is that? Is there any difference then in the reading?
Could you repeat that, ma'am?
How is reading a novel for pleasure different from reading an interesting lesson in class? Is there difference? Yes, this is a linked question, and that's why I asked.
Yeah, see, something which is interesting for you is interesting. It doesn't matter where you read. And if you are interested in something, you will find the time and the occasion to do that thing if you're
Exactly.
committed enough to it.
Exactly.
Okay, so
So-
you should give something an equal chance. Like you should be fair to it. Don't look at something as bad and problematic because it's on the syllabus.
Exactly. So one child over here is asking, I forget the name. We are always being asked to read books. All our teachers say read books, read fiction. So does reading make a reader smart? Why are we always being asked to read books?
Because reading is the experience of the world that is brought to your doorstep, it's literally in your hands. Great people,
yes.
their own experiences, the world outside. There is, of course, a difference between theory and practice. But uh, reading will give you a lot of wisdom. It will teach you about the world outside. Now, when you read a novel, for example, uh, you will understand human psychology. How do human beings behave? And even ordinary novels have a lot of psychology in them. If you look at their language, uh, it's very sophisticated in the sense that they observe life very carefully, and that is what is presented to you there. So
Okay.
it's a distillation of, it's a summarization of life itself for you.
Okay.
So that's why you should read it.
Okay. Does giving yourself incentive count as a good motivation for reading? I mean, this is a question from Shubhra Karan.
Incentive.
Yes,
Yeah, why
Shubhra.
not? It is true, but after some time, the reward is in doing the act itself of reading. You know, if you look at a child riding a bicycle on the road, the child will go from one side of the road to the other side, and the child enjoys riding the cycle. Nobody has to give them a reward for riding the
Exactly.
cycle. But
Exactly.
if you look at an office goer on a cycle, this person will curse the distance, will curse the same experience. That's because their goal is somewhere else. For the child, riding the cycle is itself a reward. Or it's like
The,
when you play
the
chess or
enjoyment, the
what
enjoyment.
else.
Yes, the enjoyment itself is a reward. Professor, how does the metacognitive skill play a major role in reading? And you've dealt with it, I think, but this child
Yes,
needs a little
yes,
more. You've dealt with it actually, but I
yeah.
think this one wants a little more explanation.
Yeah, see, metacognition actually is looking at yourself and assessing yourself. Basically, it is that. So when you were successful in learning something, you need to ask the questions, what did you do to succeed in it? If you failed in learning something, then that's an equally important question to ask. Why did you not learn something? What did you not do? And you need to come back to it and try to address that issue. And this is metacognition. You're thinking about your thinking. You're thinking about your understanding. You're
Exactly.
processing how your understanding is
Yes,
happening.
and that is
And
what makes a
that's
good
a very,
reader.
very important thing to do.
Yes,
So
and
if
that is
you're
what
not,
makes a good
if
reader.
you if you don't understand or you misunderstand, then what is it that you're not doing correctly? You
There's
need to
one.
come back to that.
Yes, we'll come back to that. There's a child, Sanjana. She said, "How will reading a novel like The Godfather be useful to enhance reading skills?"
Of course, it will enhance reading skills because, for one, uh, practice makes perfect. You're practicing the reading.
Yes.
You're looking at other cultures. You will understand your own culture. The Godfather is a sprawling novel.
Hmm.
It's a huge novel. And it is telling you something about the mafia in New York and how they live. And it's a depiction of a different culture, but it has some universal values. Like, for example, this guy goes and kills this greedy landlord who wants to evict an old woman who doesn't have money. He offers him the money he offers to pay her rent, but he still wants to throw her out, so he kills him. So he is a kind of Robin Hood. And there are many techniques that you can look at in the story that makes this mafia guy likable and respectable. So how does the writer do that? So it's a complex story. He's not just a killer; he's a human being. So
Yes,
all these
exactly.
ideas come up when we look at this novel.
Just one last question, then we'll wind up, Professor. Kajal, roll number 203. She's asking, because most of us are non-native speakers, for us, English becomes a language that is a part of intellectual makeup. How do we overcome this thinking through good reading? I mean, will reading help us to overcome this kind of block that we have? That
Okay, that's a very interesting question.
yes,
See,
exactly.
see the any language in the end has to talk about human experiences. Okay, it has to cater to one very important section of the population, any language has to do that, which is to the children. Any language has to be learnable by the children. So in that sense, it has to be simple and straightforward. The other complexities will come later. But because we read English in the context of some very serious things, it does not mean that English is always a serious language. It has all the kinds of nuances, experiences that our languages have. It has fairy tales, it has jokes, it has a lot of stupid things and so on. So you don't need to say that English is either philosophical or intellectual. Of course, it is intellectual and philosophical, as our languages can be.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Thank you. We'll wind up
Thank you.
now, and this was very, very interactive, very interesting session. And I'm sure that now the children have realized that when they were reading, they just took it very casually. There was a big lacuna between their understanding that the cognitive skills that they had, and then they've learned about metacognitive now. Yes, you've given the reader lots of new insights. Today's sessions, both the sessions, talked with Dr. Revati and with Professor Veda Sharan, I think the children will realize that the reading skill as well as listening, they have to go home and sharpen up some more now. I'm sure that the next session that we have in the coming 4 days, they're going to come back sharper and more eager with questions. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, CP Committee. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you again once more for this wonderful session that we're having. Thank you, Dr. Devjani, for getting the sponsorship from UGCCP's team. And of course, immense gratitude to our patron and doctor and principal Dr. Sister Jyoti, because she deserves so many accolades when she realizes these programs and brings to us new directions for more and more learning. Thank you. We'll be winding up the session now, concluding it. I'd remind the students, please fill up your feedback form. Instructions to students, please fill up your feedback form within half an hour, and we'll resume at 10 o'clock sharp tomorrow. Log in, be ready, log in with the new link that is going to be sent to you in the WhatsApp. Thank you. We're winding up now. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.